Today, we're putting our entire global energy system on the operating table. And the diagnosis we've come back with? We're calling it the architecture of stagnation. Now, before we get into it, you have to appreciate the sheer scale of what we're talking about. The global energy system, this massive, planet-spanning machine of power plants and grids and pipelines, is, without a doubt, the most complex machine humanity has ever built. It's the engine that powers our entire modern world. And that brings us to the real heart of the matter. What if that incredible machine, for all its power and complexity, has just run out of road? What if it's trapped by its own design, completely unable to make any more real, meaningful progress? To really diagnose this, we need the right tools. We're not just going to talk about sources, solar versus coal. No, we're going to analyze the performance of the entire architecture using 3 key metrics. So our first tool is efficiency. This is the one we all pretty much get. It's a simple question, right? How much of the stuff you put in, like sunlight or natural gas, actually gets turned into the useful energy we can power our lives with? Our second tool, power density. Now this one's less talked about, but it's absolutely critical. It measures energy's footprint on the planet. How much physical land, how many square meters does it take to generate the power we need? That's what this metric tells us. And our third, and you could argue our most important metric, is capacity factor. Just think of this as the ultimate reality check. It ignores how much power a plant could make on a perfect day, and instead measures its actual output over an entire year. This number is what separates theory from reality. Okay, so we have our tools. Let's apply them. We'll start with the old guard, the fossil fuel system that's been running the show for more than a century.
The story here is one we all know. Fossil fuels, well, they look great through our framework. They've got super high power density and they're dispatchable, which is just a fancy way of saying they have a really high capacity factor. But all that reliable performance comes at a massive, unsustainable cost: carbon emissions. It's the classic trade-off we've been stuck in for decades.
So what about the new guys on the block? When we apply the exact same rigorous analysis to renewables like solar and wind, we uncover what's called the renewable paradox. If you look at peak efficiency, the numbers are honestly fantastic. Modern solar panels are getting close to 20% efficiency, and a big wind turbine can capture over 40% of the wind's energy. On paper, when the conditions are just right, these things are masterpieces of engineering. But then, our reality check metric, the capacity factor, tells a very different story. The sun isn't always shining, right? And the wind isn't always blowing. So that amazing peak performance just collapses to an average availability of only about 25% for solar and 32% for wind. And there it is, the paradox in a nutshell. We've built these technologies with phenomenal peak efficiency, but the natural systems they rely on, the weather, means they just sit there, idle, for most of the time. So let's try to put a number on this gap. Let's quantify what this systemic inefficiency, this built-in downtime, actually looks like. Think about a massive utility-scale solar farm, one of the flagship technologies of the whole energy transition. This is its capacity factor. It's only operating at its full advertised potential for just a quarter of the year. So what's going on during the other 75% of the time? Well, that expensive, high-tech piece of infrastructure is just sitting there, doing almost nothing. And look, this isn't a failure of the solar panel itself. It's a failure of the architecture it's forced to live in. Now, to really understand the scale of this underuse, let's look at a quick comparison. A prototype system, one that operates on a completely different principle, has shown a capacity factor of 87%. The gap between 25% and 87%, that's not a small step. It's a chasm. That is the true scale of our systemic inefficiency. And this all leads us to one fundamental diagnosis. Our problem isn't a crisis of scarcity. It's a crisis of vast systemic inefficiency. We aren't running out of energy. We are literally surrounded by a colossal untapped reserve. The thermal energy in our atmosphere alone represents something like 40,000 exajoules. The problem is our entire energy architecture is blind to it. So let's pull all these threads together now and deliver the final verdict on our current energy architecture. The trade-offs are just inescapable.
If you choose fossil fuels for their high power density, you get high carbon. If you choose solar and wind for low carbon, you get low capacity factors, and you need huge amounts of land. Inside this architecture, there are no real solutions. They're only compromises. We're just swapping one problem for another.
But the limits of this architecture don't even stop at generation. The stagnation goes deeper, all the way down to the very building blocks of the machine itself, the materials we need to even build it. Think about it. Our most advanced technologies, from high-efficiency solar to whatever comes next, they all depend on a handful of pretty rare materials, elements like tellurium, bismuth, and antimony. The supply chains for these things are fragile and controlled by just a few places on Earth. This creates another fundamental bottleneck, locking the whole system into the exact same pattern of limits and trade-offs. Which leaves us with this one last big thought. We've tried every door in this house, right? We've tried the fossil fuel door, the solar door, the wind door, and every single time we end up in another locked room staring at another impossible trade-off. So if the architecture itself, if the house is the problem, isn't it finally time we stop trying to fix the old house and started designing a completely new one?
Thanks for joining us for this explainer.